Night. So welcome. Matt, if you could please take a roll call for us.
Sure. Hanson.
Present.
Tylen.
Here.
Monday. Sorry. Parpart.
Here.
Robbins.
Here.
Tome.
Here.
Zapataki.
Here.
Thank you. This meeting has been noticed in accordance with state statutes and local ordinances. Number 4 is approve the agenda. Unless there's any alterations or deletions, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion on that? If none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda's approved. Approval of the minutes. We have the minutes in our packet, I believe.
Yep.
Okay, on the back side of there. From November 15th.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to accept or approve the minutes from our November 15th meeting. Any discussion on that? If none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Citizen comments. Was there anyone present this evening that wanted to make comments? I see none. So we'll move on to unfinished business. We're done with that. New business. A, review and discuss the initial draft of Chapter 1 of the Columbus Comprehensive Plan. I will turn it over to Matt Schreiber.
Sure. So as you can see, I have a start here on the first chapter, and I just wanted to start going through it tonight. If you have any questions along the way, please interject. This is somewhat dry material, and I'm sure, I'm open to Q&A. And as you can see right now, I put initial draft in the agenda because this is still a rough draft. There's still going to be formatting. I intend to add a bunch of pictures to this because a lot of times when you're looking through comp plans, it's really boring reading. So I find adding pictures and some color to it makes it easier to read and digest. But with that being said, I'll just kind of dig in here and go through, starting on page 1. You'll notice history. This is something that I still intend to beef up a little bit. This is really kind of compiled from a couple sources. We actually have a lot of this information on our website. JT did a good job compiling this before he moved on. Also, the previous comp plan that was done in 2003 had some of this information that I've taken and reformatted and reworded and looked at. And then I have looked at a little bit some of the letters that are the Fred Stair history that's actually out on our website as well. So this is kind of a rough draft for what it is. I'm not going to read it word for word. It's just I think it's important. We do have a very historic community, and at some point in this plan we really need to acknowledge that. And we're going to start in chapter 1, but as we go through the plan, depending on what chapter, we are going to work. I'm going to be putting in other historic things as they fit the chapter, whether it be transportation or whether it be housing or whatever. So, or down the line. So, to the extent possible, I'm going to be recognizing the history of our community. So, with that being said, I'm just going to jump right into on the top of page 2 where it says demographics. So usually in the first chapter of your comp plan, what you see is basically a hard look at population, income, what else do I have in here? Households, educational levels, and age distribution, things of that nature. Basically, your kind of garden variety socio-economic data, just to basically paint a picture of what is our community. So starting with table 1, which is our historic population trends. This is data that has been compiled. Pretty much all the data you're going to see tonight is from a couple sources. The census, and then Wisconsin Department of Administration Demographic Services Center. They do all the population projections. The projections are what they are. Some cases I may not necessarily agree with them, but it's the best data I have to use for this to project out in the future. So that's kind of what we're using. Just looking at for the first table I used obviously the city, but then I compared it to basically our neighbors, and then also looked at the counties, both Dodge and Columbia, because we straddle we're right on the county border, and I guess there is 3 parcels of our community in Dodge County, so I included Dodge County, and then also looking at it compared to the state, just so we can kind of get a little framework. And you can see in 1980, the population was 4,049, and the 2017 estimate is 5,096. But if you look closer, really, the growth in our community didn't really happen until you hit 1990. Between 1990 and 2010, we grew by roughly about 1,000 people. One of the things I note in there is when I was doing some history on and you'll see it in the timeline that's in later in this chapter. But when you look at our community, one of the things that's really impacted it is 151. And in 1991, between Columbus and Sun Prairie, it was expanded from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. And in the next 20 years, we had a boom of 1,000 people. So I think that there's a very strong relation between those 2 things. Also, just comparing it to the neighbors, it all depends on how you look at the data. I know you look at Fall River, it shows that they've grown by 104% and they've doubled, which is true. But you also look at just the raw numbers, and during the same time frame, we actually had the city of Columbus had a growth of 1,047 new residents compared to 890 in Fall River. So sometimes, depending on how you want to look at the numbers, I guess it's all how you look at it. So we've experienced good growth. It's very comparable to what's going on here in the county and in the state. So.
Welcome, Uriah.
So on to page 3, looking at population projections. Once again, the DOA shows solid growth for the city of Columbus, growing by over 1,200 people from 4,991 in the last census all the way up to 6,290. As I said earlier, this is DOA, their projections. I guess I'm not, I don't do population projections, but I do think these are light. I think we will probably have no problems eclipsing what they project in 2040. But that's just my opinion, so that doesn't mean it's a fact. It's just, but you can see here that what they show is a 26% growth, which is higher than the county and higher than the state. So we kind of expect to keep with that rate and be a faster growing area than some of the other parts of our state. So I think that's a good thing, and it's a thing that obviously is a solid reason why we're doing this plan, is to make sure we're planning for this growth. One of the other things I liked that I saw that was in the previous plan that I basically stole was just a little chart that shows the historic growth and then how we have it projected. And as you can see, it's a pretty linear form. It looks like the line's pretty much going straight up. So it's just kind of an interesting way to look at the growth. Moving to
Matt, there was one simple typo in that first sentence. It just says the city of Columbus will buy 26% by the year 20. It should be be 26% by the year 2040.
Thank you. Yeah, I still need to go through and I'm probably going to have JT isn't here anymore, so I'll probably have somebody else proofread this for me. But thank you. Yeah, it should be grow. Okay. All right. Page 4, looking at the age distribution. This was one that I thought was pretty interesting when you started digging into the data. I actually had 2010 in the middle, but the table was too big, so it didn't really make a difference if I had that 2010 data in there or not, because it kind of showed the same thing. The trend is, when you look at the 2000 data, the median age in Columbus was 37.5 years old. The median age for the state was 36 years old. And then you go to 2017, and we've gotten younger as a community. The median age is 36.5 years old, and the median age for the state is 39.2 years old. So you look at it and you're like, well, it's 3 years. It's not a huge shift, but in the reality, it is. I mean, you look at there's kind of two things in play here. One is the age group 25 to 34, younger families in Columbus actually grew in this age during this time. So it went from 13% of the population to 16.5%, or if you want to look at the raw numbers, it went from 584 to 827. In the same time, those numbers are going down at the state level. And the other thing is our population over 75 has actually decreased from roughly 17% to 14%, and at the statewide level, it's going up. So we're kind of not experiencing the aging in Wisconsin that you may or may not have read about. That's really an issue in rural counties, especially in northern Wisconsin. But so that when you look at that trend, I think it's a good trend that we're staying steady. We're not going to have all of a sudden an increasing demand for senior population. And that when you get down the road, that could have impact on housing and other areas of the plan. But I mean, considering that the population staying fairly consistent, I think is a good thing. All right, here's another interesting table. There's a lot of data that I found was interesting as we were looking through this. So table 4 on the top of page 5 shows educational attainment, and it shows it by the city of Columbus, Columbia County, and the state of Wisconsin. And you can see it from 2000, 2010, and 2017. And this is, once again, this is census data. So you can see kind of how they have it broken down here with it's less than ninth grade to 12th grade with no diploma. And then you have high school graduate or equivalency, and then some college with no degree, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, and then basically graduate degree or higher. One of the things that I like to look at is the percent of high school graduates or higher. You can see that Columbus has closed the gap on this, or closed the gap essentially on the state and the county and surpassed it. And for percent of high school graduates or higher, we're up to 95%. In 2000, that was 84.5%. So that's quite a substantial gain in that over that time frame, where we were a little bit below the state in 2000, but now we're the same as the state and we're above the county. So I think that's a good factor. But one of the things that I found that was really fascinating, yes, please interrupt me.
Can you check your data?
Sure.
It's too coincidental that 2017 columns for the city of Columbus and Wisconsin are identical.
Oh, yeah. I will double check that.
Yeah.
How they? Yeah, that's got to be a type. Yeah. But
It is probably fairly close, but I almost guarantee you it's not the same.
no, you're right. That's got to be. That is a good catch. Sorry about that. Okay. Sorry. I'll take a look at that and fix it. I have all the tables back in a spreadsheet. But the one fact that the one thing I know is correct is the percent with bachelor's degree or higher has gone up substantially in Columbus, especially over the last 7 years. So going from 2010 to 2017, which is the most current data we have, it's gone up from 23%. Now this is population population 25 years or over. So it's not the entire community, obviously, because it's obviously if you finish college, you're going to be about 25 or a little younger. But we've gone from 23.8% to 33.2%. And I went back and I looked at the raw numbers. And that was a 350 person increase, essentially from 771 to 1,121. And one of the great things is that when you look at the census data nowadays, it used to be where they do it every 10 years, and they'd give you a long form, which 1 in every 7 households got, and then the short form, which was just basically, like who lives in your household and what the age is. The long form gave you all this detailed information about, income. It gave you all the information about race. It gave you information on housing. It gave you information on education. Well, now they do the American Community Survey, and they do it every year. So we have data every year, but it's a 5-year window. So the 2010 data is actually 2006 to 2010. The 2017 data is actually compiled. And the reason why they do that is they need a 5-year window to get a statistically significant sample in order to basically provide good data. So the good thing is we have data every year. And so I looked back because I was kind of curious if this was just an anomaly and maybe somehow it's a margin error. It went up every year a little bit. It went, 23.8 to like 24, 20. It went right on up. So it really looks like it's a trend that is something that I find very interesting and a change maybe in some of the demographics in our community. So any questions on? Now, the next couple items are looking at income. At the bottom of page 5, you have per capita income. Per capita income is just a simple measure of the total income divided by the total population. So it gets these numbers. Essentially, as you'd expect, it's going up. With inflation and all that, you're always going to hopefully you're going to see an increase every year. And both Columbus, Columbia County, and Wisconsin all kind of grew roughly at the same rate. Pretty much, for the most part, we're slightly below the county average, and we're slightly below the state of Wisconsin average, I think with the exception of 2000, where we are above Columbia County for per capita income. When you look at the median household income, in the median is just essentially you have all the numbers in the data set. It's the middle number. It is a good measure because if you have a few really wealthy individuals, they could throw out a whack the per capita income, especially in smaller areas. But this is also kind of similar in the aspect that you always see growth, as you would expect to see with inflation over the time period. But one of the things that you note here is in 2020 and in 2010, we were below both the state and the county, but in 2017, the 2017 numbers, we surpassed the state. So hopefully that's a sign that the household incomes are on the rise, and hopefully we'll, in the next 10 years or next time we're doing a comp plan update, hopefully we'll surpass the county. Table 7, which is also on page 6, is a look at percentage of people below the poverty level. And this is the first spot where I kind of had a little issue with the data with looking at the ACS data, because in 2010, you'll notice that the number for percentage of people below the poverty level in Columbus jumped to 15.5%. And I'm going back and researching, and it's not like there was, I didn't, I guess, live in the community, but I'm not aware of any sort of like mass layoff that happened in that time. I can't find any sort of rationale why that number's high, because when you look at the 2011 data, it goes back down to like 12%, and then after that it goes, and obviously I know during the Great Recession that everybody was hit hard, but it seems like that there's a little margin of error in there, and I'm not sure it was that much worse than the state or the county, but that's just what the data is. And
Doesn't some of it have to do with, and maybe I'm off left field here, with people that are not working in the community but live here, but like Madison or
no, well,
some of those people
this
maybe
is
got laid off or something?
This is a measure of people's income and if their incomes are below the poverty level. So if a bunch of people were laid off, correct, that would impact this.
There might be a little bit of history, because I think, if I remember right, in that 2010 era, there was a little bit more emphasis placed on the building of 235s in the city of Columbus. Cheaper government programs would bring in the less advantaged people with incomes. That might be something you could check into once. I might be out of the ballpark, but it does seem reasonable.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I think it also seems reasonable to say that Columbus was a growing community on that fringe end of the time of expansion, and probably would have been in a position to be hit harder than other places, being kind of out on the margin of residential expansion when the housing market collapsed, right? So I think you're probably onto something with your idea, and maybe a combination of a few things. But the upshot is that it was an uptick of maybe a couple of years and smoothed out over time.
Yeah, I was surprised that it was that much higher than the county or the state. It didn't really match the other years, but I wasn't going to change the table to say 2011 because it looked better. It just didn't make any sense. But the good news is since that data point, that point in time, that we've gotten to 2017, and those numbers have gone down considerably to 7.7%, where we're actually below the county and we're below the state. And hopefully, a goal would be to keep moving towards the 2000 number and getting below, getting back to about 5%. That would be, I think, ideal.
Matt, just one thing to point out. I think the sentence that says the increase is likely due to the great recession that crippled our nation's economy in the late 2010s.
Yeah,
that should be 2000s.
You're right. Thank you. See, that's yeah. And trust me, when we're going through this, there's going to be others. So I'm not. I try to read it, but it's
Several eyes are better.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. The other thing that, and I think this was brought up originally, I think actually you brought it up, Michael, is when we were doing the original public participation plan, and I was just kind of laying out what's going to go in the comp plan. I believe you said that you wanted to look at the 151 corridor, and I thought that was a great idea. So it kind of leads into the next section is one of the things, another section I want to add, and some of this also I should add might move around. So I might not leave the impact of highways in the first chapter. It might actually move to the transportation chapter when we get to it. But there's two things that really impacted the formation of our city. One is the highways. The other is obviously rail. Well, actually, I had three because agriculture had a lot to do with it. But I mean, just talking from the infrastructure of it, highways, and there's a lot of data out on this Wisconsin highways website that you can find that gives basically like the history of each highway. It's great. And really the two that I talk about in here that really made the largest impact was 16, because 16 back in the early part of the last century was a really predominant route going basically from Milwaukee all the way up to La Crosse. And I think that had a lot to do with when it came through our community in the early part of the 1900s. And then obviously later on 151 became a critical route, and really probably the route that's now driving most of our growth in our community when it became a 4-lane road from Madison to Columbus. But then now that it's 4 lanes basically I shouldn't say basically, it's 4 lanes from Madison all the way up to Fond du Lac. So I just kind of gave through a history because I like charts. I made the nice little timeline that basically shows when things were put in. From the research I found, and starting in 1959, the Sun Prairie bypass was built. While Pond was bypassed in 1962, and then later in '64, Beaver Dam was. We were bypassed in 1976, but when we were bypassed, it was only a 2-lane road. They called it a super. I can't remember the term right now, but it was I think it was a Super 2 highway is what they called it. And then, what? And then in 91 is when we were expanded from Columbus into, and I've tried to verify this data as much as possible. And the one thing I'll tell you is if you look at Google Earth, Google Earth has historical aerials on it. And the one great thing is the oldest aerial for the Columbus aerial is 1992. And you can tell that construction is like just kind of wrapping up and they're starting the next leg to go north to Beaver Dam. So, yes, sir.
Go out Maple Avenue,
Yeah.
under the bridge. They're dated.
Oh,
It'll tell you one was in the 70s, one was in the 80s. I think it was 76 and 83, if I remember correctly, but they are dated on the bridge,
huh.
on the pillars. So you can verify your information there.
Okay. And then the last leg was it was 2 lanes from Waupun all the way up to Fond du Lac in 2004 when that was completed. And then starting on the top of page 8, I wanted to show the growth along the whole corridor. And thankfully, this didn't take as much time as you'd think. DOA actually has this data set in an Excel spreadsheet that you can download and you can manipulate. So it was the harder part was finding all the communities that were along the corridor, and then just showing the growth, and then so looking at the growth for the communities along. The one thing you'll notice is basically all the growth's happening in the cities and villages that are along this route, with a few exceptions like the town of Bristol, excuse me, and what was another big one? Town of Beaver Dam, and then the town of Fond du Lac had a little bit of growth. But typically, the towns that had growth actually had some sort of exit or access to direct access to 151. So it's not terribly surprising that those are the ones that actually saw some growth. But I thought it was kind of interesting that you could see the growth here. Obviously, you know, Madison is growing like crazy. It's kind of at one end of it, so I debated whether or not you leave it on. But even if you take it off, there's still about the same amount of growth. I mean, actually, it goes up a little bit to like 42% over that time period. So there's a lot of growth on this corridor, I guess, is where I'm going with that. Any questions on the data or why I'm showing that? The other thing I would add then is on the top of page 9, I do the population projections. So obviously we looked at the history, and now I'm taking the same subset of communities and looking out. This is a little bit, they're not projecting as much growth as we've experienced over the last 37 years, since 1980. When you look at it, we're showing 12% growth along the corridor between now and 2040, which, going back to what I said earlier, I'm not sure I buy all of DOA's projections, but I'm not also a demographer, so I don't, know how they get these facts and figures. But it's just kind of the point is that we live in our community is along a corridor that has experienced a lot of growth and will continue to experience a lot of growth. And I really think, with obviously what's happened in Sun Prairie, when you look at that, they grew by, they had 20,000 people. They were 12,000 in 1980, and now they're, more than twice that. So I really think our community is going to experience a lot of growth here over the next 20 years. So. And like, what else did I want to share? Oh, another thing that I looked at that I because the DOA data was readily available, I didn't include it in this first draft. Was what I looked at was compared to 1980 and moving forward, everybody, each community that was, within I think I used 500 or 250. I used the population so you could see communities that were about the same size of us in 1980 and where they're at today, and then each step along the way and how they compared. And it was kind of interesting. But the thing was is, you know, you saw like communities in there like Wanakee or Mount Horeb, and it was always or communities that were outside of Appleton. It was always communities that were closer to an urban center that saw that growth. And you know, then there's areas like Edgerton or Evansville that's kind of out in the fringe, but they're off an interstate that kind of had the same growth pattern as us. But I didn't really find anything that really helped us look towards the future. So I didn't put that in there, but I just thought it was interesting to kind of look at how other communities that were roughly our size in 1980 have grown. But I didn't find anything worthwhile to put it in the plan yet. So if you want to see that data, let me know. I can share it with you. It's color coded and all kinds of fun stuff. The last thing that I wanted to start with is just to get you thinking. When we start developing these chapters, we're going to have goals, objectives, and policies in each chapter. And this in the first chapter, I always like to, when I've done plans in the past, always put in just a brief description of what each one is. So goals are broad statements that express general public priorities about how the community should approach development issues during the next 20 years. These goals are based on key issues identified by the community stakeholders from public outreach efforts for the plan. And as I mentioned before the meeting, the community engagement team, as part of that, the effort that we're undertaking is going to be incorporated into this plan. So a lot of the goals will be directly influenced by that effort. Objectives they're more specific than goals and usually attainable through planning and implementation activities. If you accomplish an objective, it contributes to the fulfillment of a goal. And then policies are simply rules that our council can put in place, our city government can put in place to ensure plan implementation. So that's all I had. I've been working on the housing chapter, starting to pull together a lot of the data for that. And also the natural resources, is it utilities? No. It's the agricultural, cultural, and natural resources chapter. So in the upcoming months, you'll see a lot of information, and we're going to keep going. And when we get to a final draft, that's when we'll bring it in and we'll review it. There will be an open house. There's got to be a public hearing. But that will be later this year. So this is the first run through. Yes.
What are you looking at for your timeline?
Well, originally we were hoping to have it approved by midsummer, but what happened was when we partnered with the citizen engagement team, it took us a little longer than I think we anticipated to kind of get. Yeah, so it's kind of probably means that this probably won't be finalized till sometime next fall, I would guess. Right. I mean, honestly, the writing and looking at the data, it all depends on how many, it depends on how busy I am, but it's not that difficult to write. And
still within the boundaries of the existing comprehensive plan. So
Yeah.
we're not like we're going out on a leg here.
In a lot of what's been written previously hasn't changed dramatically. It's going to be looking at it and verifying that it's still accurate. I mean, it's not. So time-wise, I don't. It's just looking at the data and making sure we have current demographics. Did you have a question? No, you just look. Oh, sorry.
No, I always look.
Okay. No.
Well, that's why.
I do have some observations.
Sure.
So, I love data, so I'm going to try to keep a leash on myself. Something that I think might be valuable here, there was a comprehensive plan in 2010. Was there one done in 2000? I forget when the
2003. Well,
Okay.
it was last amended in 2003. I think it was originally written in 2001.
Okay. I forget when the state law about comp planning came into effect.
1999.
It's always interesting to see, not just for me, but I think for anyone, to see what the predictions were on some of these same tables at those periods of time, right? How accurate were those predictions brought to now? Past information is not an indicator of future results, but it does help to sort of line those up. So, yeah, it might be valuable to see some of that. Whether that's in the
Yeah.
comp plan or not, or just
No.
for our viewing or not, is,
The
is maybe up to you.
2009 comp plan has old projections from DOA in there.
Right.
So we could
Right.
we could
In
definitely,
2010, what did it say was going to be happening in 2017? And how close is it to what's actually going on now?
The only thing I would say is that until we have the 2010 census, all we're working on now is a 2017 estimate. So it's not,
Oh,
you
sure.
know, so and I've already planned that in 2022-ish or whenever the census data, because I mean the census happens in 2020, but it's not like the data is immediately available.
Right.
Usually you don't get like the full census data out until like 2021 or 2022. And I envision that I would just take whatever documents we create and update the tables. So then we're on a cycle for, because by law, we're supposed to take a look at this and update it every 10 years. And I think it would make sense if every time you update it, it's right after the census, because then you get the best population numbers to work off of. So I've already kind of had that on my radar.
Okay.
So-
But these 2017 estimates aren't projections from 2010. They are best estimates made from data available a couple of years ago, is my understanding of how DOA does.
I've looked at, they kind of put information out there how they do projections and their estimates. I'm not a master of them,
Sure.
I guess. So
Yeah, and I
They-
don't
they
want to
seem
get
to
into
be-
the
they seem to
minutia on
have-
it now, but
yeah, they seem to, like one of the things I was looking through for the housing that I didn't know is that for the census data is they showed that after 2013 there was no housing units built in Columbus, and I looked at the data and I'm like, yeah, there's 23 building permits issued last year, and there was like 17 issued in 2017 there was 23 building permits issued. There was like 18 in 2016. I'm like, yeah, this is not. I'm like, there's error there. So, it's data. It's the best
what
we
do
have.
economists call it? A lagging indicator.
Yeah.
Anyway, but sure.
Yes, sir.
You done, Rick?
And I was just going to say, I think what maybe we need to do independently is start thinking about how do we use this data to accomplish or to formulate those goals, objectives, and policies that you talk about, right? Data is data. Great. It's in a report somewhere, and more often than not, it goes and sits on a shelf. But how do we interpret this to set those things is maybe what we need to set our brains to.
Personally, I think, because Bob and I dealt a little bit with this when we were on the council a few years back, but we still have to have a master plan, more or less, that decides how we can stay equalized in the housing market and in the jobs opportunity within the city limits. And those are the things that I look for in plans based on a 5-year period or a 10-year period readjusted every 5 years. That, to me, sounds like more of a business plan that I've been used to operating with. Future goals, whatever you want to call it. But DOA information is great,
Yeah.
but you have to be able to understand it and use it for each local situation. Like, how do we increase jobs would be what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and going back to the goals, objectives, and policies, especially when you get in the objectives, that's going to be the implementation portion of it. And one of the things I've said to this group and said to council a few times is that when these planning efforts are done, as long as I'm city staff, there's going to be some sort of report out every year on what's been done. Because in the past, we've hired a consultant to do it. They've done good work, but they're not here every year to say, well, this year we built, 10 houses. This is what it means for that. This is, we had X amount of business land that's been developed this year. What does this mean for jobs? Doing an annual report on what we're doing to accomplish what our goals are in this document is, I think, is a good first step to actually starting to implement what we put on paper. And you're right, a lot of the demographics in here, they're going to collect dust. I know that, and that's fine. But as long as I can create an executive summary that I can give to Jason and Michael when they're on council, and they can easily understand it and they can easily implement it, and then I can give them a report every year saying this is how our policies are affecting our city. That's going to be how we're going to get there. So, yeah, I agree. And not many people are probably that interested in population growth or the amount of educated people in our community. But yes.
I'll play devil's advocate. Highway 151 and Highway V, basically halfway between Sun Prairie and Columbus. How would that change your possible projections if subdivisions started going up out there?
There already have been subdivisions going out there.
No, not as much as projected back in the 80s.
Well,
They were talking by the late 70s, early 80s that it was going to be pretty much Sun Prairie that far out already. Because work was talking about where we have to build future substations, and that's where we were planning on building them. So, it was it's
I
late, but
I think if Bristol ever had, that's still town of Bristol, right? It's got to be.
yeah,
Yeah. They don't have sewer and water there, right?
no.
If they had a sewer and water district in there, that probably would change things. You're right. The development could easily go there, and it could easily see a boom. I guess I'm of the opinion that people probably prefer to be on city sewer and water than well and septic because of the costs. But it depends on what the people want. Some people don't want to be in the city, so they want to be out there. So I still think both areas will see growth, but I think we'll capture a fair amount of that growth, especially when, as people have talked about, with the growth of Sun Prairie. I think it's just natural that we're the next community in line outside of 151 that we're going to see some growth as the prices go crazy there, and the prices are still reasonable or affordable here, that we'll see some of that spillover.
Okay.
So.
I like the data and all the charts, but I also like the narrative because I think that there's other things I think you can kind of mention in the narrative when you look at the plan for things that may or may not happen. When I look at the highway information, all these cities have access points off of 151, and they feed into Highway 39 or Highway, is that 41 on the east towards Oshkosh there?
Yeah.
4-lane highways. But in the next 10 years, is there going to be another access point added somewhere? That's not figured in with the data we're getting from the state, but Highway 26 basically stopped as a 4-lane highway that could connect to 151 in 10 years. I think those are important things to kind of note, even though they don't really affect your data. But if you have more access points to Highway 151 or any of the other larger highways around here, that could affect the traffic or the transient.
I do know that WISDOT likes more of the freeway standard than the expressway. And the expressway is like if you're just south of Beaver Dam, like where you can get off the highway at grade, turn left and turn onto some county roads. They don't like that. And there's even a business that's still off of 151 that has direct access right off of as you're heading north. Is it the Cheese House?
Yep.
You got Cheese House, you
Yeah.
got Walters, you got
Yeah.
AmeriGas.
Yeah.
That's why
So-
that's 65 and not 70, I
The old
believe.
hotel up there.
Is it? Yeah.
Parts of the highway.
Correct. Yeah. Because
But there's
the
a lot
amount of
of-
access points
Yep.
ultimately dictates the speed limit.
But there's
And
been
there's-
discussion about that part of, the upgrade and when
Yeah.
that happens, and also
Oh, they'll-
another
they'll-
bypass, I think, west of here that could connect to 151 somewhere too.
Well, they'll
so.
definitely try to take away as many access points as they can to make it safer, in their opinion.
Sure.
That's just, I can tell you that from working there and just knowing how they operate, yeah. Which, I'm not saying that's a right or wrong, I'm just saying that's, so. Well, and as I said, the formatting's probably gonna change, I'm probably gonna spruce it up a little bit so it's not, so drab, and probably add some pictures. Picture says 1,000 words, right? So maybe you can take out some words and put in some pictures, and yeah, you'll see it. It'll be evolving, and at a certain point here, there'll be, and each chapter will probably be about this. They're only going to be about 10 pages. I mean, it's not. It ends up there ends up being more in the appendix. And the other thing that will be coming will be maps. So. Any other questions?
Thanks for all the effort.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
No,
A lot
it's
of time into it.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot more data I have. I'm kind of a nerd like that. So like when I have time on a Friday and I know there's nothing coming in, a lot of times I'll be looking at stuff like this. So I knew it was going to be when I first took the job, and Patrick's like, oh yeah, one of the first things you do is the comp plan. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a lot of work, and trying to get everything else figured out here at the city, and it's starting to come together. So
I think you're doing good.
thank you.
Anything else?
Just happy holidays to everybody, and hopefully everyone has a safe and good Christmas, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks. All right.
See you next year.
Yeah. All right. If there's nothing else, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Motion is second to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We stand adjourned. Happy holidays.